Good morning. I got my helper out here again today, and he thinks we should show you what he helped make this week. We made this cutting board for Hunter to take home. So we had to come out this morning and finish wiping the oil on it. So it's ready to go. He's gonna go home tomorrow, so I'll be on early tomorrow, but you'll be able to watch it at any time. And then on Sunday, I'll be doing worship from home due to the cold weather. We're not going to meet at Mabel on Sunday, so I'll be leading worship from home. So today we look at Matthew chapter 23, verses 1 through 22. And Jesus is talking to the crowd of people and to his disciples, and he's given them some warnings, but some words of encouragement. He says, "The scribes and Pharisees sit on Moses' seat, therefore do whatever they teach you, and follow it, but do not do as they do." Because Jesus was seeing in these scribes and Pharisees, these religious leaders, that, they were saying one thing, telling the people they should do one thing, teaching the laws of God, but they weren't following them themselves. And so Jesus was warning the people about the scribes and Pharisees, saying that, they are teaching you what Moses taught, but they're not doing it in the right way. And then he says they tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and they lay them on the shoulders of others, but they are unwilling to do anything, lift a finger to move them. And he says that they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. And you might read that and say, what on earth is that all about? Well, the phylacteries, if you go back into Exodus, chapter 13, I think, or somewhere back in there, Exodus 13:9, and Deuteronomy in chapter 6, they talk about these things. It said, and I'll just read a little bit from Deuteronomy 6, starting at verse 4. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Keep these words that I am commanding you, recite them to your children, talk about them." And then he says, "Bind them as a sign on your hand, fix them as an emblem on your forehead, and write them on the doorposts." So these phylacteries that Jesus is talking about, that the Pharisees and the scribes were having on their forearms or on their foreheads, it was a kind of a leather container, a leather box, if you would, but just a leather container that they would have, the commandments in, and they would have the reminder that they are God's children and that they are to do God's will. And the fringes on their gowns, a fringe is just, a piece of cloth or string that, kind of hangs down. You know what fringes are, but they'd have them on the bottom of their robe and on the end of their arms, and stuff that way. And the longer those fringes were, the more important the person was and everything. So Jesus was saying, you got to beware, because they're making a big deal out of this, and maybe they had this, maybe they'd have a phylactery, a leather pouch on their arm plus one on their head, just for show. But that was what they talked about. And he says that. He says, they like to have the place of honor at the banquets, the best seats in the synagogue. They like to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces. They like to have people make a big to-do about them. Kind of reminds me of some of our celebrities today, that, well, don't you know who I am? And they think they should get special treatment, special recognition. But yet, on the other hand, we have other people, other celebrities that, try to be as inconspicuous as they can, to try to live as normal a life as they can. And these would be the people that Jesus would say to model your lives after. And as we get into a little bit further, we're going to read 3 of the 7 woes to the scribes and Pharisees today. But these woes aren't directed to all of the scribes and Pharisees. They are directed to many of them. But there were good scribes. There were good Pharisees. There were people, there were scribes and Pharisees that followed Jesus, that looked at him as the Messiah, that recognized him for who he was. And then he gives his disciple, before we get to the woes, Jesus gives his disciples some instructions, as you maybe have it. But he says to them, don't let people call you rabbi, because you are all my students. Jesus is saying, I'm the rabbi, you're my students. And don't let anybody call you father on earth, because you have one Father that's in heaven. You are all children of the same fathers. You're not supposed to be called an instructor, because why? Jesus is your instructor. We are. So what are we supposed to be called anyway? Servants. Sisters and brothers in Christ. We're not to try to exalt ourselves. We're just, to keep a humble heart, to have some humility. And I just read a deal that someone shared on Facebook this morning, that humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less. So you don't put yourself down, but you don't, so you're thinking, you don't think less of yourself, but you think of yourself less. So you put different emphasis, fewer emphasis on you than on the others, and that's what we need to do, is just, to have this humble heart, to have a heart that recognizes God and that realizes that, we're all in this boat of life together, and we need to work together. And so then the last few verses we look at today, 13 to 22, are the beginnings of the 7 woes to you. When we read the Beatitudes, it's blessed are you, blessed are you, blessed are you. And I think it's in Luke's gospel that there are some woes that come right in after the Beatitudes. In Matthew, I don't think the woes are there, but the woes to the Pharisees come here. And so it's woe to you. And he says, hypocrites, for you lock people out of the kingdom of heaven. How do you do that? I mean, how do you tell somebody that they're not worthy of God's love? How do you tell somebody that the offering you're bringing, the sacrifice that you're offering, isn't good enough, and you're going to, you can't get into God's kingdom, that God doesn't love you? How do you do that? But they were putting so much emphasis on rules and regulations and different things that, people were at the point of, well, what can I do? It's hopeless for me. So, they were doing some false teaching, and Jesus is saying, woe to you for doing that. He says, you don't go in yourselves, and when others are going, you stop them. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, for you cross sea and land to make a single convert, and then you make so much about this person that, it's more about you, and stuff. Woe to you, blind guides, and so, Jesus is pointing out to them that they're not seeing the whole picture, that they're looking at things in the wrong way. He says, what's more important, the gold or the sanctuary? What's more important, the altar or the gift that's on the altar? And he's talking about, what's more important, that, is that God is there. It isn't the building, it isn't the altar, it isn't, the gift upon the altar, but it's all of it tied together, and it's God who is there, and it's just, he says, whoever swears by the altar swears by it and everything on it. Yeah, Hunter's waving in the background again. I can see him back there. So, but, and then the last thing he says, whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and the one who is seated on it. But it's a reminder to us that we need to be careful about, what we swear on, what we make our promises on. And, back in Matthew 5, Jesus told his disciples, let your yes be yes and your no be no. You don't need to swear on things. You don't need to use something else that way, because your word should be good. Be a person of honesty, of integrity. Be a person that when you say a yes or a no, that people know that they can trust that. And, he talks about being careful of your words and of your statements. But through all of this, he's in his woes to the scribes and the Pharisees, to these religious leaders, he's reminding them and us that our relationship with God and with our fellow human beings is what's important. And we've got laws from Moses to follow, and we do need to follow them. We've got, and God said, I'm going to write my word upon their heart, and they will no longer need to be taught that way. And so we know what's right and wrong. We have this thing called a conscience that reminds us. Most of us have a conscience. There are some people that I kind of wonder about, but that's beside the point. Maybe they just choose not to listen to it. And I think that could be a part of Jesus talking to the scribes and Pharisees too, is that, we need to listen to our inner voice, to the inner voice that God is leading and guiding and directing us with. And, but above all, to remember that God is God and that we're not. And that as we live our lives, that we are to be compassionate, loving, and forgiving, and filled with grace. And that's where God's laws lead us, is to be that loving, forgiving, and filled with grace as God is. So again, tomorrow morning I'm going to be on, most likely really, really early in the morning. We're going to meet Hunter's mom somewhere along the line, and he's going to go back home again. So until tomorrow, may God richly bless you.